Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. I hope it's going to be a fantastic year for us all. I cannot believe we're sitting on the 3rd of January already. But hey, here we are. So, wonderful show tonight again. Our first show of the year, actually, with our lovely Dr. Jerry. And I look forward to having Dr. Jerry as well as Andy Porter, psychic surgeon. Very, very interesting. So look forward to having a chat with them. And I don't think I'm going to be doing any announcements tonight. We can leave that for next week on Monday. Yeah, cool. Welcome. Nice to see you all. And yeah, without any further ado, let's get on the stage. Dr. Jerry Marzinsky, well, Dr. Jerry, and Andy Porter, psychic surgeon. Opala. There we go. Welcome, gentlemen. Nice to have you both here. How are you? Jerry, how are you doing?
And good to be back
Andy.
again. And I've ran into
Yeah.
Andy via a referral because working with the Mace Energy Method, it's great for getting rid of trauma. I mean, it works better than anything else I've ever seen in my entire career. But it doesn't work so great with getting rid of psychotic voices. Right? Maybe a 25% cure rate with the voices, which is much better than psychiatry. So somebody wrote me and said, "Have you heard about Andy Porter?" And I said, "No." And they said, contact him. He's got a money-back guarantee. If he can't get rid of the voices, he'll give the money back. And I said, well, what do they got to lose with that? So I started referring him some clients, and I'm getting positive feedback from a number of them. Some of them, the voices got worse, but it might be because he was mucking with them and they didn't like it. So Andy's in the UK, and he's been doing this for quite a while. He was working with another researcher for a good while who has recently passed away, and Andy's decided to kind of carry on the program. So I wanted to bring him on tonight because there's very few places that work with people who hear voices who give a money-back warranty that if they can't get rid of the voices, they will give you the money back. So that's a very unusual situation. And Andy's so confident in what he does that he's willing to do that, and he has done that. And I just kind of wanted to let you guys hear from him today and let him talk about how he got into this and how he works. And apparently he works with another entity. And I can tell you, schizophrenia is not a disease. It's not anything that can be cured by medications. No psychiatrist has ever cured schizophrenia with any of the medications that they've given these people. Same for any mental illness. Psychiatry only treats symptoms. They have no idea what causes schizophrenia. They believe they do. They made up excuse after excuse. First they blame mothers, then they blame genetics. Both of those failed. The geneticist says we don't find any genetic markers for schizophrenia. So then they switched to blaming chemical imbalance, and that was a lie put out by Eli Lilly when they came out with Prozac. They knew it was a lie at the time, but they put it out anyway. Then the universities started teaching it. Big Pharma loved it because it was something that they felt they could medicate. And what they were doing was they just turning people into zombies. So they didn't care about the voices as much. And, the medications did weaken the voices. They made them less strong, but they also turned the people into kind of hollowed out shells a lot of the time. And they do cause permanent neurological damage with long-term use. So psychiatry isn't curing anybody. You ask a psychiatrist, have you ever cured anybody? And if they're telling you the truth, they'll tell you no, they haven't. And, if you don't believe this, if you believe this chemical imbalance stuff, ask them what their baseline is. When a person goes to a psychiatrist, you'd think if it was a chemical imbalance, they'd have some kind of baseline. You know, what chemicals are out of balance or by how much? It does not exist. It has never existed. They have no test to test for a chemical imbalance of the brain. Matter of fact, they don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. They're basically drug dealers for big pharma, who's making $11 billion a year selling antipsychotic drugs that are doing permanent neurological damage to the brains of these people if they're used for a long enough time. So they don't know what causes schizophrenia. I know for positive, from all the years I've been on the front lines working with schizophrenics, these voices are entities. That's what's causing the voices. They're entities. It's not a chemical brain imbalance. There's nothing physically wrong with the person. This is a spiritual battle. It's a spiritual condition. And, you know, psychiatry is not going to come to understand anything until they realize that. So Andy has realized that for a long time, and I'd like to turn this over to him and maybe question him on the way. So Andy, how did you get into this? And when did you realize that you were dealing with entities and not some kind of chemical imbalance or genetic abnormality?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jerry. I think you framed the kind of start of this really well, actually. So just a bit of background on me, really. I started to do, obviously being spiritual for a while, had a spiritual awakening, that kind of thing. So I kind of wasn't particularly spiritual in my kind of normal life when I was 20 years ago, basically. Then I kind of moved into a new house in a new space in the UK. And that house, I started to experience entity problems, basically. So I started to see shadows around the rooms. I started to have things kind of go bang in the night, really, in the way that we kind of think about them. So I started to kind of live through a spiritual experience that was very negative. So lots of negative things happening, lots of things happening to me whilst I was asleep. So kind of that conversation, you know, was kind of framed along with things eventually kind of climbing into bed with me, bed sheets lifting. So it felt like I was kind of living in a horror film, really, for quite a long time. And I realised that it wasn't me. I was a normal guy. I was kind of an IT architect. So for me, everything was very black and white. I wasn't particularly spiritual at all, had no real understanding of entities and the spiritual arena. So when I started to go through this experience, it kind of drove me to distraction, really, to a certain degree. And I needed to learn and experience and understand what was happening. So I spent a lot of time then in Glastonbury in the UK buying books on spiritual things, predominantly spiritual possession and that aspect of the spiritual arena, to find out what was going on. I started to see things, I started to hear voices. As I said, things would sort of climb into bed with me at night, the bed sheets would lift up, things would touch me, I'd get like a real kind of evil feel to the experience. And I started to look for help. I didn't really know where to go. I kind of figured church would have been a good place, but I wasn't religious particularly, so that was something I didn't do. I knew that I couldn't go to see a GP, a medical doctor, because I'd probably be sectioned with the experience I was having. I was sort of left in this no man's land of having no one to really understand or explain what was going on. So eventually I contacted, or my wife to be now Jane, contacted a friend of hers, a lady called Christina. She was a spiritual psychic, and she just laughed and said, oh yeah, he's just got some sort of entity attachment problem. So spiritual energies, discarnate spirits or entities, are basically in his house. We just need to do a house clearing, remove them, clear the space, and he'll be fine. So that's what she did. So I paid for a session, never met the lady. She remotely connected, cleared my house. Everything felt great for a very short time. And then everything started again, but worse, basically. So that kind of pushed me into understanding what was going on. And I started to have this very deep interest, really, in spirituality, but along the lines of what are these entities? Why can't we see them? How do they exist? How can they touch us? How can they manipulate our senses and speak to us? Because I was hearing voices, telepathy, basically. And she explained all of this to me and said, look, you're just spiritual, you're a medium, you're kind of telepathic, you don't know you are. I mean, everyone is, of course, as we all know. But effectively, you need to control it. You need to learn to protect yourself, and you need to push these energies and these entities back, basically. So that was easily said. not so easily done, of course. So I spent the next 2 years going to meditation groups, reading book after book after book about spiritual protection, psychic protection, entity attachments, different species of alien entity that can kind of come into our space. So I became quite knowledgeable about that whole area because of my pretty traumatic experience, really. And that then led me down the route of healing. So I started to do crystal healing courses, Reiki courses. And at the end of my Reiki 3 master course, I basically was talking to the lady, and she said, you know, you're now certified as a kind of Reiki master. We did lots of hands-on practice with people, and I started to notice that when I put my hands on people, I would lose consciousness, and I wouldn't know where I was, and I just feel something coming in to my energy field. And she explained that there was this short Chinese man called Chen, basically. He was a Chinese kind of doctor, effectively, and he explained to her that he was a spiritual guide of mine, and I would be working with him for the rest of my life, performing what he termed as psychic surgery, which I'd never heard of. I had no idea what he was talking about, really. So, of course, as time went by, I started to basically speak to him, connect to him in meditations, and then I could hear him all of the time, obviously with telepathy as a sort of spiritual medium. And then we started to perform psychic surgery on clients. So people would come to see me in a kind of, we had a small shed in the garden of the house we lived in. I'd put my hands on them. Basically, Chen would take over me completely in full trance, and he'd speak to the client and he'd tell them what he was going to do. And
Andy, how did you feel when this entity told you, hey, we're going to be working together?
I didn't believe any of it.
What were you thinking?
I didn't really believe any of it, to be honest. I mean, I was new to the field, so I just kind of laughed and agreed. I'd never heard of psychic surgery. I did some research on psychic surgery and saw the kind of Brazilian version where they take a rusty scalpel and kind of cut people and throw blood around the room. And I thought, obviously, I won't be doing that because that's obviously not what we do in the UK. I'd probably be in a very small box if I do that. So I kind of knew that I wouldn't be doing that. And he kind of explained that the modern version of psychic surgery is clearing people's etheric field. So he would perform a surgical operation on someone's etheric field, clear out negativity, negative attachments, that kind of thing. And then what he changed and removed would then vibrate back into the physical body, probably over about a week. So we started to work on people that had tumors, all sorts of other things. I worked on people with eye problems, all sorts of things, really. But what I started to notice was, Jerry, started to have people that were schizophrenic that came to me, so people that were hearing voices. And I didn't know anything about schizophrenia. I didn't really know anything about that whole world, really, to a certain degree. So I would just literally speak to them, put my hands on them in kind of full trance. And then Chen started to talk to these entities. So he would laugh and he would say, I know who you are. We've met before, you know, in previous lifetimes, etc. I know what you're about, and you have a choice to basically leave this person from your elected free will, or we will remove you forcibly from their field. So, as you can imagine, this became spiritual warfare, basically. So Chen would basically tussle with these entities, and eventually they would either leave or he would clear and remove them.
Well, what was that like for you to kind of watch that happen? Did you hear them fight, or I mean, I know they're not going to leave voluntarily. They will stay there and hang on until they're, you know, ripped out of there.
Well, there were two things really, Jerry. So one thing, some people hearing voices had discarnate spirits with them. So earthbounds, so people like us that have been human, that have died. So sometimes it was earthbounds that were connected to them, and they were very easy to talk to.
Yeah.
And you just say, look, you know, you realize that you're causing this person terrible trauma, and they're hearing you. You can hear your voices. You know, they're hearing voices, schizophrenic, and you need to leave. And generally, they would agree that they couldn't leave. If for whatever reason they'd been connected to that person, they kind of impregnated them into that person's etheric field, and they were stuck. They weren't able to leave of their own choice. So Chen would basically facilitate a disconnection of that attachment, and as soon as they left, the voices would literally stop immediately.
Yeah. And those guys were a lot easier to get rid of than the demonic.
Yeah.
They're basically lost and stuck.
Yeah, they're very easy. And like I said, they want to go. They actually want to leave, but they generally can't leave. So that was the one group of people.
I remember one I was talking to when I was working in the psychology of the state prison, and it was one guy who was hearing voices, and I was talking to his voice, and I said, how did you come to be in this person? You know, how did you get in? He said, well, I was riding my motorcycle and I got in an accident and apparently was killed, and I didn't know where to go. And I saw this other fellow riding his motorcycle on the other side of the highway, and I jumped into him. And that was the guy I was talking to.
Yeah.
You know, he wasn't an evil guy. He wasn't, you know, kind of causing misery and stuff. He was just lost and didn't know where to go and was causing trouble because he was stuck there. But these demonic ones is a whole different story. Those guys look like they're assigned to destroy the person that they're in.
Well, that was what I kind of noticed, Jerry, really, is that the discarnate spirits are very easy to clear and remove. And there's probably quite a lot of people that work in spirit release therapy that do that sort of thing. So SRT is quite well known. People have been doing it for a long time. And generally, they're working with discarnate spirit, and they're easy to clear and remove. But entities, as you just said, are a very different kettle of fish altogether, really. So they're very negative. They live in a very low vibration. And their end goal is for someone to commit suicide, in my opinion, basically. So they're connected to someone. They want to take them through a traumatic experience and make it more and more negative. And that normally drives to self-harm. But the end goal, in the way that I see things, is when someone commits suicide, they're in a state of absolute fear, anger, rage, all of the negative frequencies, but the most elevated negative frequencies that we as humans can create, really. And that's what they feed on. So they feed on that adrenaline, that fear, that vibration. So it kind of is pretty obvious to understand, if you understand this conversation, that those sorts of entities are going to always be driving people to suicide as their end goal, really.
And I've had a number of people ask me, it's like, okay, if they're parasites, if they're feeding off these people's negative emotion and they kill the person or they have the person kill themselves, why would they kill their host? And I didn't have an answer to that until one day somebody wrote me and said, you know, listen, look what happens when somebody suicides. The whole family goes down with them. You know, the parents are going, well, we should have done something better, or we should have known, or it's our fault. And the whole family then starts generating this negative emotional energy. And then they keep kicking that up. So, you know, they're being fed both ways.
And of course, they then move on to the next person because they're parasites. So once they've effectively killed the host, they just move to another one. And there's no end of humans that are, you know, in negative places emotionally, with trauma, pain, you know, substance abuse, all those sorts of things. So there's lots of food, effectively, if we see it that way.
Well, I've talked to a number of them, and they said they were assigned to destroy that particular person. And they were told that they had no light in them, and that if they didn't do what they were told, they would cease to exist. That's what the entities above them were telling them. The last one I spoke to, I asked him if he ever had a life on this planet. You know, if he was a dead person. He said, no, I've never been human.
No.
So it was some other kind of energy that was sucking this guy dry.
Yeah, I think that's my experience, is that, again, I separate everything into discarnate spirits, so people that have been human like us, that have died, or entities. And the majority of the entities that we're connecting with and talking about have never been human, and they never will be human. They're a completely different species, basically. And
are they all different kinds? Or is it?
So basically, as part of my kind of journey, really, I started to specialize in schizophrenia, hearing voices, not by my choice, to be fair, because some of the clients are very difficult. And I had a couple of experiences. I was lying on the bed, or the clients in front of me lying on the bed, hearing voices, schizophrenic. The voices are telling the client to kill me, literally. And the next thing I know, one of these guys was a big strapping guy, and he literally leapt forward and put his hands around my throat and actually tried to suffocate me. And of course, I'm outside in the garden in a shed looking at the house, and I could see Jane making Sunday lunch, and she's pottering about. I thought, this is the last thing I'm going to see, because I couldn't breathe. And he was literally strangling me. And in the end, you know, my thought went out to sort of Chen and the team to say, like help, because we hadn't even started the session, and he tried to strangle me before Chen came in. And the next thing that happened, his hands just basically flicked down by his sides, and Chen forced himself in and basically started to perform this kind of surgical removal of this entity, basically. But I had red marks around my throat for days after that, and kind of walked in, grabbed a brandy and said to Jane, "You never guess what's just happened to me." And she said, "Don't worry, let's just get Sunday lunch and you'll be fine."
You know what? When I was working at this big state hospital when I first graduated from graduate school, and I noticed that psychiatrists were being attacked by schizophrenic patients at a rate much higher than anybody else in that hospital, except for attendant staffs that were there with these schizophrenics 24 hours a day. I mean, they weren't attacking regular doctors. They weren't attacking dentists. They weren't attacking physician assistants. They weren't attacking psychiatric nurses. They were attacking psychiatrists. And it would be like every month, you'd hear of a psychiatrist that got beat up by a schizophrenic somewhere this was a massive psychiatric hospital. There were 10,000 patients there when I got there.
Yeah, wow.
And I had no idea why that was happening. 7 years after I started working there, one gal told me that the voices were telling her that the psychiatrist was poisoning her. That's why she went off her meds. And that, the psychiatrists were trying to kill her with the medicines, and the voices pointed to the nasty side effects of those medications as proof that she was being poisoned. And right then, as soon as she told me that, I went, well, that must be what's happening with the attacks on all these other psychiatrists, because I felt that psychiatrists were always a little bit afraid of schizophrenics, because there at the state hospital there was an unwritten rule that you don't do anything to upset a schizophrenic that you don't have to do. And if they found you doing that, they would get on you. So when I went to the work at the state prison, that place was set up for violence. It was set up to deal with people that were out of control. So I was able to push these guys pretty far to find out what was going on in their heads and really not have to worry about the administration. Because if a prisoner went to one of the wardens and said, "Hey, this psych guy is picking through my head and he's asking me about the voices, and I don't like it," they'd go, "Get out of here, go play in the traffic. I got more important things to do." But when they did that at the state hospital, when two of these patients went and told the psychiatrist that I was asking them questions about what the voices were and how they worked, I ended up in the psychiatrist's office the next morning being told, "You will not do that. These are hallucinations, and you're making the patient worse by insinuating that they're not, or they're real, that they're actual something going on, and that they're not hallucinations." So they didn't even want you asking about what these voices were, or doing any kind of investigation into it. They would stop you cold.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, Jerry, isn't it? I mean, that's why this field isn't moving forward very well or very quickly from medical.
Exactly right.
We're not looking at the actual problem. And from my perspective, we've got thousands of clients, and we've worked with hundreds and hundreds of schizophrenics and people hearing voices. And if we can actually get to, because of course, the reason it works from my perspective and the way that we work is I don't actually do anything effectively. So most of the work we do now is remote, really. So in that kind of story that I was talking about earlier, so there was an email out of the blue from Dr. Terence Palmer. So he was a PhD academic, wasn't spiritual, wasn't mediumship, wasn't telepathic, couldn't talk to spirits, but he firmly believed that spirit possession was a problem, and most of the mental health problems we see today, the epidemic really of mental health, has a spiritual source.
I think you're right.
He wanted to prove that spirit possession was still a thing. It's a huge, big problem, and we need to look at resolving that from a spiritual perspective rather than through other means. So him and I connected and kind of worked together for 10 years, basically, on lots of clients, well over 1,000 cases of schizophrenics and people hearing voices, to try to adapt our method and protocol to basically address how do we, one, find these entities, because they can hide in people's fields. So how can our spirit guides look at the field, find what's connected, and then clear and remove them? And of course, it turned out not to be just entities and discarnate spirits. People that had cursed energy also fell into that bracket. So if someone's been cursed, they have a negative stream of energy kind of coming into their field, and these entities hook onto that energy, that cursed energy, link into it, amplify it, and obviously make things worse for that person. So we started to realize there were a whole host of problems really that we needed to look to resolve, rather than just disconnecting a discarnate spirit or an earthbound or an entity attachment.
Now, on those resolutions, every time you get a resolution, are you keeping the what do you call it? The patient's remarks about what happened. So you can put all those in someplace on your website and say, okay, we got all these testimonials.
Yeah, so what we did, so we do that. We've got like feedback forms that we send out to every client after their session. So normally about after a week, they get sent an email to say, if you wouldn't mind, we're doing some research, could you fill in our research forms? So we've got a catalogue of that. And Terry basically documented 1,000 cases. So we actually printed out and had 1,000 documented cases of client kind of feedback, really.
Well, are you putting that on the internet, on your website, though?
Yeah, so basically, so then obviously Terry passed away with COVID in 2021. So that information we've put into kind of, like a statistical analysis format. So at that point, myself and a guy called John Webster basically co-founded our organization called Spirit Release Academy. So it's separate to what I do. So SRA spiritreleaseacademy.com is the website you can go to. So that's where we actually teach practitioners to do this work. And that's where that documented research is.
Well, I'd like to encourage you to actually put the patient's response somewhere, because the psychiatric mafia isn't going to look. You know, they're going to just go, oh, these statistics are a bunch of bunk. They say, oh, they're not peer reviewed, and they make up all these excuses why it was bunk. But if you put the actual client's responses somewhere where they can read them, people will feel the truth of that, rather than just reading cold statistics, because they're going to blow both of us off. They're going to say, you guys are nutters, you know. I've already been there. They've already diagnosed me.
Andy, I would really like to know what psychic surgery is, please. If you can just take us there. You speak about it, but if you could just maybe take the viewers through what that whole process actually is. If you could maybe speak to us on that for a while.
Yeah, perfect, Chantelle. So really, psychic surgery really is spiritual surgery performed by spiritual discarnate spirits, our spirit guides, if you like, on someone's etheric field. So we kind of know that we have our 3D human body that we can see, we can pinch and talk to, but there's also lots of different frequencies other than just our 3D physical body. And the closest one to that is called the etheric field. So there's an etheric field that is a complete blueprint mirror of our physical body. And anything that happens in that etheric field vibrates back into the physical. So if you have like a cancerous tumor, that will start in your etheric and kind of basically manifest itself into the physical. So we start to think about that kind of terminology. That would point to the fact that anything that we need to clear and remove, and the traumas and things that Jerry talks about, all of that is baked into that etheric field. So everything that we've experienced, every emotion, positive or negative.
It's in your DNA. It's in your DNA. It's completely in the DNA, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, basically. So the etheric field is the place to work. So what Chen, my spirit guide, explained to me years and years ago is psychic surgery is surgery performed by a spiritual team, basically on the etheric field, and they will find these negative intrusions, negative attachments, entity attachments, cursed energy coming in, so streams of negative energy coming in. When they look at the etheric field, they can see all of these things, and then they can work to clear all of the negative vibratory frequencies, if you like, in that field. And then we feel that in our emotional body, in our physical body. So anything that they're doing is cleared. So the way he explains it to me is we have sort of surgeons that perform physical operations. We know that if we go to have a physical operation, the first thing we get is anesthetic. And that anesthetic disconnects the spiritual part of us from the physical, which is why we feel no pain. So effectively, we're kind of poisoned to the point that the spiritual body kind of leaves the physical slightly, and therefore the surgeons can operate, do things physically. We don't feel pain. And then when they give us the antidote to the poison, anesthetic, we call it, of course, then the spiritual body slams back into the physical. And then, of course, we come back around. So that's how Chen sort of explains that to me from a physical perspective, and they do the same. So when I perform psychic surgery, if I put my hands on you, first thing you feel is, well, some people don't feel anything particularly, but most people feel like a cold liquid that runs down the back of their neck as the surgeons give you a spiritual anesthetic to kind of deaden the etheric field. So the people lying on the couch tell me they can't feel their hands, they can't feel their legs, they can still feel their body. But if you kind of shouted fire, they couldn't jump off the couch and run out the door, basically, because they've had a surgical anesthetic. And then once that surgical anesthetic has taken place, Chen would be stood in talking to them. I'm in full trance at that point. My hands are on the stomach. So he doesn't move his hands from the person's stomach at all. And then he basically starts to pull negative energy out of the field, and people can feel things leaving their stomach. Some people feel things wriggling around inside them. So that would be like entity attachments that are being located and pulled out through the etheric field. Other people feel things moving, feel heat. So there's lots of different kind of feedback, but most people feel very calm, very peaceful, but can definitely feel things happening. And then, of course, when the session ends, effectively that spiritual anesthetic is removed, and that person can then feel their hands, their legs. They can obviously sit up off the couch and basically we normally sit, have a chat for sort of 5-10 minutes, and then they disappear. So psychic surgery is surgery on that etheric field, basically, but with no scalpel, no knife, no kind of blood. It's the modern version. Chen calls it the modern version of psychic surgery, basically.
So, Andy, how does
it's obviously energetic. Go, Jerry.
How does Chen find your patient? I mean, because you're working with people all over the world, right?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Jerry. So the way that Chen explains that to me is everyone has their own unique frequency. So you have like a 16-digit number, that's your frequency, that's Jerry. Chantelle has a very different 16-digit number, that's her frequency. So the moment we connect, if you send me an email, basically your energy is connected to me effectively. So Chen can jump on that energetic strand and find you anywhere in the world from your frequency. So of course they're not bound by physicality and geographical location. They're looking for you on the astral plane, basically, because they're connecting to your field, not to you personally. So they don't need to know where you live. People used to send me their hair in the post. So Jane would open up these kind of, envelopes, and you'd have bits of people's body kind of in there, like nail clippings and hair and stuff. And Chen said, this is the old world. We don't need to do this. We just lock onto their frequency, and that's where we go to basically perform the psychic surgery.
Well, no, I know you've gone with somebody will write you and ask you for help for somebody else who's somewhere else. I mean, so that wouldn't be a lock on to the person who contacted you. But how does Chen find the other person?
So again, the same way, it's almost like an energetic strand. So the person that's booking the appointment, if they're booking for, say, their son or daughter, and obviously that person hasn't contacted us, Chen just basically goes straight to the link. So the spirit guide team seem to know and be able to find the client, even though they may not be connecting to me or emailing us effectively. So it's kind of, it's obviously energy, but he talks about this frequency, this 16-digit number that everyone on the planet has, and everyone has their own unique frequency. So and that's what they look at. So when he performs psychic surgery on someone, his opinion on that is he's looking for your frequency. So anything that's in your field that isn't your own frequency is something negative, something that you've picked up, an attachment, could be a discarnate spirit, an entity, astral parasite, cursed energy. So any frequency that's in your field that's not yours is what they clear and remove to bring you back to spiritual sovereignty. Because spiritual sovereignty is just your own base frequency, effectively. And that's what we should all have. We should just be our own self, our own frequency. But most people have got other things connected to them. And of course, that breaks the spiritual sovereignty and means that you've got other energies connecting to your field effectively.
So the objective here really, you know, when we deal with energy, because of course we know we're created from sound, frequency and vibration as human beings, everything really resonates. So obviously when people have, oftentimes, you know, when we're dealing with, I deal a lot with people that have come out of SRA. This channel is basically, you know, most of it is talking to survivors of SRA, which of course we know go through the most horrific torture and ancestral curses and all sorts of, all the things that you speak about, right? Sometimes people will do so more out of choice, too many drugs, too much alcohol, neglecting your health, your well-being, whatever, you know. So we open our chakras up and allow then these lower vibrating entities to enter our field, right? So that's how they would then take host of our body. So what you're saying to me, pretty much, because I believe in spiritual alchemy, I think that's the only way it is. You know, by the law, energy can never be created or destroyed, only ever transferred or transformed. So when we understand that there's a reason these base frequencies or these base entities have been able to attach themselves to us to begin with, right? So I think it's wonderful that they are, because as you're saying, Andy, you know, these frequencies are so intense, or these entities are so intense, they're so literally merged in to the person's field already on so many different dimensions. But then obviously it remains up to the person thereafter to maintain that frequency. It's like anything. If you're going to the hospital and having your heart operated on, you've got to take time. You've got to heal that heart. You've got to do all the right things. You've got to change your behavior. You've got to change your diet. You've got to change your exercise regime very often. You've got to change the way you do things. It's exactly the same thing here. And I think this is what a lot of people, I mean, I'm a healer myself. I've been one for many years. So I think this is what a lot of people miss, is that they think once that operation is done, then it must be, they must be fixed and healed, right? And then it's up to you, the individual, to maintain that frequency, to maintain that vibration of joy. Because when you're operating on the vibration of joy, these things can never, ever get to you again. It's a frequency war. You know, we talk about spiritual warfare. I talk about resonance and coherence, because we have to become resonant with our own unique vibration and alignment. Because when we do that, that's when these things will dissipate. And even if some of them are lucky enough not to have the psychic surgery, because what I use, and I know exactly, I use Tibetan singing bowls actually, that sound, vibration, frequency, oh boy, you got to see those entities cannot handle those low vibrations and those high frequencies. So that dissolves and we just send it back and we create light from that transformation, right, of energy. But it's up to the person all the time as well to be able to have to maintain that frequency. And I think that is such an important thing. I don't know, what is your take on that in your experience of doing this over the time that you have done it? Obviously, it's like the follow up and to make sure that these things do not enter your field again, because that's entirely up to you as the individual, really. That is entirely up to you as the individual.
I think, Chantelle, you framed it so well. I mean, I've been doing this 20 years, and that's where I am. You know, I do a meditation every morning to clear myself, to check my sovereignty, to make sure there isn't anything negative connected to me. So holding that high frequency. And if you can move yourself into that high frequency band that you talked about, we hold our energy there on a daily basis, and negative things cannot attach to us because they're vibrating at this very low frequency. And Chen used to show me a picture. You remember when we were children, you had those roundabouts that you used to sort of put your friends on, and you start to spin the roundabout, and they go round and faster. And eventually they'd be going so fast that you couldn't jump on, and the people on them couldn't jump off. And Chen said, this is basically where we are. When your frequency is so high, these negative things can't attach to you. They can try, but they can't. And that's why the frequency of sound is so important, because as you just said, with singing bowls and, you know, the bass frequencies of our music has been altered away from the way it should be for pure sound, because of course pure sound stops these things connecting to us. So when I used to have a lot of entity problems back in the day, I used to go to bed at night and put classical music on outside my bedroom door to keep these things back, because I would see them come up the stairs, because I could see these entities with people, literally like hitchhikers on their back. So I'd see somebody walk through the room, and I kind of see an entity with them, and they'd pop up from behind, and they'd show themselves to me. And I used to be quite frightened, of course, of that. But I started to just laugh and think, okay, I can see you, you can see me. But, you know, so I started to put things like sea salt around the house. So I sprinkle sea salt around our house, and I realized that these things can't move very easily when we have high frequency energy. So classical music, sea salt, and I used to be able to trap them in a corner. So they'd come in the doors, or they'd come into the space, and I'd see them walk up the stairs, and then they'd be a big like line of sea salt which they couldn't cross, and they'd walk around the outside, and then I'd have a room with lights on, so it was very bright, and classical music playing. So I started to realize that they're really actually held. Again, there's certain things we can do to push them back from a protection perspective. All of the things that we kind of talk about. So again, if you look at religion, it talks about, you know, holy water on demonic entities, that kind of thing. So water that's been prayed over has a different vibration that they don't like. So I started to realize that there's a whole host of things that we can do, but everything is frequency, basically. And as you said, and I think this kind of comes back to Jerry's conversation earlier, for the clients that this doesn't work very well on, they're generally the ones that don't hold their frequency up after a clearing, and they go back to doing substance and alcohol, drugs and things. And of course, it brings their frequency down, perforates their field, and then these attachments can come back in basically and reconnect to them.
Exactly.
So the aftercare is the conversation, I guess, that we all need to have, because the aftercare is the bit that's missing.
Exactly. You know, this is what I see as a healer all the time, you know, and especially what I've noticed, you know, when we on this platform dealing with a lot of deep trauma. But I also notice that a lot of people don't want to do the work themselves. They are waiting. They like others to do it for them. It's why so many people are addicted to medication. I will tell you, over the past 30 years as a healer, I have seen so many people become addicted to their healers as well, or their therapists. It's ridiculous. You know, that's why I have a policy. I'll only see you for a certain amount of time, then off you go. Sure, I'm going to be there. We can touch base here and there. But in that amount of time, I give you the tools. Now it's up to you to go and do it for yourself. That's what we have to do. Is we have to realize what in our shadow aspect is holding us back. What do we keep going back to that keeps us in that low vibration state? And I think that is where we take responsibility and accountability for our own lives. So many people have been through atrocious things. You know, women have been beaten up, men as well. Men and women have equally been through horrific abuses. You know, we've learned how to put a mask on, and unfortunately that pain becomes wounds, septic wounds, that then play itself out in a very dysfunctional way in the world. And we all blame each other. It's one big sick virus, right? So at some point we have to look at the wound within and how we perpetuate and how we contribute to the wound, personally and in our community. And of course, that has the knock-on effect into our society. So I really think, for me, that's all there is. We have to be accountable spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And when we as humans can do that, we elevate, and that's how we win the war. We don't have to kill anything. We just elevate out of the matrix. It's like a transformation of consciousness.
Kind of great way to explain it, Chantelle. I mean, Chen explains to me the reason that he's working with me and the team that we work with. So we have an organization, oddly called SRA, Spirit Release Academy, as opposed to satanic abuse, effectively. So SRA, Spirit Release Academy, that we set up, the idea is that we train practitioners to basically work with spirit guides to remove these entities and bring people back to sovereignty. And he explained that that's how we, as you just said, win this war. We don't need to go to war physically. We just change the vibration of the planet. So as people are cleared from this level of negativity, people's frequency comes up. And if we clear one person in a household, they'll basically help the other people in the household to bring their frequencies up. And then as the frequency starts to ascend, planetary-wise, these entities that are here can't stay in the space because their vibration is too low. And that is the game, really.
It's more like us elevating is the way I, sorry, Jerry. It's more like us elevating is the way I see it. It's kind of like this is the lowest swamp. In the swamp, you're fighting. And then it's like the next thing you grow your proverbial wings and then you lift out of the swamp. And no matter what shark or crocodile or whatever's in the swamp, once you're above there, it can't touch you. But you've got to learn to lift yourself out of there. And that's through frequency and vibration. Sorry, Jerry.
I think that's why things like satanic ritual abuse, exists, because if we work along with the concept that the planet is run by these negative entities in our finance, our cultural environments, they're connected to religion, they're connected to finance, they're connected to politics. So my belief is they run everything from behind the scenes, basically. And this is why children are traumatized. So children born into families are exposed to satanic ritual abuse because, of course, that creates fragmented personality, disconnects them consciously from source, takes them into a place of low vibration, negativity, rage, anger, all of those things. Of course, that holds this frequency down. Whereas if we actually address the children and protect our children, then that starts to change things dramatically. And I think that's my kind of agenda, really, is that we're here to try to help everyone, but we're very focused on bringing this awareness out to the general public that it's the children we need to protect and look after from these parasitic entities that are here running everything from behind the scenes, basically.
Yeah, and the child traffickers, they have to go after them and knock them out. They need to be locked up. Now, Andy, you said you run a school where you have students, and do each of those students get a chin? I mean, how did they get, you say you have chin go out and do the work. Is there some place where you get these spirits to come to the student and you're assigned to this one, and how does that work?
So it's a great question, Jerry. So basically with Spirit Release Academy, we work in teams of 3, basically. So we have, students that apply to join are either what we call facilitators or mediums. So if we go back to where I was working with Terry, I was the medium, spiritual medium. Terry was a facilitator, so he couldn't talk to spirit. So we worked through the protocol that Terry and I developed, and Spirit Release Academy has modified it and changed it, along with Jono, my co-founder. So we have basically students that join, we basically run courses and match. So in every kind of class, effectively, there'll be, say, 5 or 6 mediums, maybe 7 or 8 facilitators, and they work together in teams. But the mediums obviously have their own spirit guides already. So these are professional mediums that already can talk to spirit guides. They've already got a spirit guide team. Some of them would be stage mediums. So they already work professionally as fully fledged, independent professional mediums. So they join us. And then when they join us, Chen and the team behind the scenes basically educate and teach the guides to do this work. So the spiritual medium they obviously go through the training process that we take them through on the physical, but the spirit guides are also being taught how to identify these entities and how to clear the fields, remove curses, parasites, and obviously bring people back to sovereignty. So effectively, behind the scenes, there's this huge, big spiritual team that's growing that Chen and Jono's guide is called Whitehawk are basically building. And there's a lot of different entities in there that have never been human that are being attracted to work with us to help to clear this kind of negative layer that's on this planet, basically. So spiritreleaseacademy.com, if you head over to the website, you can kind of see a lot of information there. We've got a YouTube channel, Facebook page, TikTok page, all the normal social media things. But what we're looking for is obviously to find practitioners that feel the call to do this work. And then we're building these teams. At the moment, there's about 100 practitioners across the world that we've kind of put together in effectively 2 years, really, that are kind of doing this for clients. They're certified by us, they're working with our protocol, and obviously they've got their guides behind the scenes. So that's kind of the configuration that we're working with.
Now that's interesting because MACE only has about 100 practitioners throughout the world right now also, and growing. So it's interesting that we're both at the same number level or thereabout.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, if we can connect the two modalities, because lots of people have said to us, lots of other healing modalities step back when the client is schizophrenic, hearing voices, suicidal. Lots of practitioners don't want to work with those people; they get left, really, and lots of psychiatrists don't really want to work with the extreme ones either. So, of course, that leaves this big hole where there isn't really people or modalities that will pick up and work with these people that are having these extreme problems. And effectively, that's kind of where we've placed ourselves, basically, is to step forward when everyone else steps back, basically.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're finding with MACE also, because the original founders are saying, hey, all of their problems are due to a negative identity, which is like mental programming. And, coming from where I have after close to 45, 50 years working with schizophrenics, there's no doubt in my mind that those voices are entities. They are not something that's programmed in their mind. They feed off of that negative programming, but they're individual personalities. I mean, I've spoken to a bunch of them. When I saw that they started running patterns, and that's another thing that psychiatry is completely ignoring. I've got a list of patterns on my website that these entities repeat over and over and over and over again. Yet psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia insist that these things are not entities, that they're due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. And they won't even look at that list. They won't even see it. They're so far gone, and on top of that, they're making billions of dollars every year selling these toxic drugs. So they're not about to change. They've got $11 billion worth of antipsychotic drugs that they're pawning on people, where they're basically poisoning these people. You look at those side effects; they're side effects of being poisoned. And you talk to these people who are taking these drugs, and they're like hollowed out. They feel like shells of who they really are. They're drugged. They're like zombies. So it's like, yeah, the voices don't bother them as much, but they're not who they were either. They're drugged up. And nobody's being cured. Nobody's being cured by any depressants. Nobody's being cured by any psychotic drugs. So these guys are often left field, and they're calling us the nutters.
And that's the funny thing, Jerry, isn't it? We kind of laugh at them in the same way they laugh at us and think, well, we do this every day. We see the results, from our perspective, our appointments are like 1 hour. So my understanding or my kind of thought process on it is eventually you would think, wouldn't you, the big American insurance companies that are paying out huge amounts of money would look at the sorts of modalities that we have and think, well, we'll try that first. If that doesn't work, then maybe we need to medicate the patient/client. But if you can do a 1 hour session of our psychic surgery clearing, and stop the voices and bring them back to sovereignty, and then align them with your MACE process, the saving for the insurance companies would be colossal.
Oh, it would. It would be horrendous. Now I tried that when I was working for a private psychiatric hospital at one point, and the patients that I was working with were feeling better, were getting better. The voices were weakened and sometimes gone. And my supervisor saw that, and the psychiatrist saw that. But I got fed up with the politics there, and I left. And I said, they wanted me to come back. I said, no, I'm not coming back. But what I will do, I'll teach your chief therapist what I know and how to do this. And they said, okay, we'll do that. You need to go through the process to become a volunteer to do that. And I said, okay, I'll go through this process. And it was just as bad as being hired. When we got to the point where I was ready to start teaching, the psychiatrist goes, no, we need to go through risk management and get their approval. Of course, risk management took a look at it, and they're going, well, these guys are nutters. We're not going to do anything that puts the hospital at risk. So why even try it? And they just killed it. And people were getting better, and they saw it. It didn't matter to them.
Yeah, I think that's the thing though, Jerry, isn't it? Again, it depends upon the intention of what you're trying to do, really. The way that we work, the way that you work, and Chantelle, we're all trying to help people because we've been through problems ourselves. And I've had some pretty horrendous entity problems. And I kind of look back now and think the reason they probably tried to take me out of the game 20 years ago is because of what I'm doing now for the last 20 years. So because I actually got to the point, things were so bad in my kind of experience, really, I actually drove at a wall. Because I wanted, I couldn't cope with the voices, the bedroom stuff. I was getting no sleep. Things were climbing into bed with me and touching me in places that you don't really want to be touched in the middle of the night. And I couldn't tell anyone really. And my friends just used to laugh, say, you're lucky. I thought, no, it's not luck. We're dealing with evil, very negative entities, basically. So I kind of, went for a drive one day and kind of drove at a wall. And there was a bend at the bottom. And I kind of basically went around the bend, but I didn't have my hands on the steering wheel. And I know that was some sort of intervention. And when I kind of continued along the road, I didn't know what would happen. And I was expecting to pass, obviously. And I kind of sat on a beach for a whole weekend, just throwing stones in the sea, just wondering what is going on. And it kind of dawned on me. And that's why I became so aggressively annoyed with these entities. I thought, you've basically ruined my life. You've ruined everything that I had. And I'm going to find out what's going on. And when I do, I'm never going to stop, basically. And that was my kind of dictate. And that was when Chen appeared. And I thought, right, this is real. These entities are real. And I'm going to be working against them now for the rest of my living life, basically.
I had several things like that happen to me also. I mean, completely miraculous where I survived and I shouldn't have. I mean, it didn't make any sense that I was still alive after some of those things happened. And then when I started working at the prison, where I could actually find these patterns and then try to disrupt them, some of these patients completely recovered. Okay, but every time one of them completely recovered and the voices were gone, at 3 o'clock in the morning, something would come into my bed and push me down into the bed, and I couldn't tell anybody about this. I mean, that happened every time one of them fully recovered and the voices were gone. It was like they knew where I lived. They showed up at 3 a.m. They started crushing me into the bed. They didn't like me. And there was, I remember one time I walked into, when I was working in the emergency rooms doing psych crisis, I walked into work one day and there was a gal laying in the psych annex. She saw me come in, and it turned out I was assigned to do her psychiatric evaluation. When she came into my office, we got to talking, and she said, as soon as she walked in, the voices said, "Stay away from him. He's dangerous." So it's like they knew me, and I'd never seen this girl before in my life, ever. But whatever it was in there knew about me.
I thought that's probably why you're here, Jerry. I mean, I truly believe that's why we're all here doing this, really, because we are the opposition, effectively. There is, if you look back to the sort of pyramids, I started to kind of research the pyramids and depictions on the walls, and all of these, old ancient artifacts show these entities that are kind of bigger than humans with bird-like faces or some sort of hieroglyphics, and they're all pointing to the fact that there were ancient civilizations here that were not human in the past, and I think from my perspective they're still here. We just can't see them because our kind of visual viewpoint is so small. Anything outside of our frequency range we can't see. But we can be stood right next to an entity and we can't see it, but we can feel them. If they come into our field, we can actually feel goosebumps, or we can feel their vibration and their energy. And some of these negative things that I've experienced doing my work, the kind of the vibration of evil is off the scale when they come into your space. Your heart's thudding at 160 beats a minute, sweating, perforating. It's just these things have such a low anger, negative vibration. They put us into immediate fear. I used to have the same as you, 3 a.m, things used to come into the room, basically trying to, control my dream state in different ways, negatively, obviously. And, I've kind of experienced that. And every time you do that, even when I've been doing it for so long, when you stand next to something that's so negative, you immediately go into this fear reaction, and you have to kind of get control of your mental state and say, no. I used to visualize a tiny mouse and think, God, they'd be showing me some horrific picture to create fear. And I used to change the picture in my mind to be a mouse and say, no, you're a mouse. And they'd show me some evil entity, and I go, no, you're a mouse. And I'd change the picture. So I started to learn to take control of my emotional state. And then when you can do that, you can basically tell them to kind of vanish effectively. And that's when I would put a thought out to Chen and say, Chen, just remove this negative interference from the bedroom. And as soon as I would put the thought out, they'd be gone. And that kind of happened for years, really. So it is all about us learning how to deal with these entities, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Swedenborg said that every negative thought you have doesn't belong to you. It's coming in from a lower vibration. And that you have to separate those thoughts from who you are. And that's basically with schizophrenics. They have to understand that those voices they're hearing, even though they sound like all the other thoughts that come through their head on a day, thousands of thoughts, they don't have the same intent and they don't have the same frequency. They're always negative. And those don't belong to you, but they sound just like the other thousands of thoughts you have during an average day. But they're telling you something very different.
Yeah, I think that's the clever thing, Jerry, isn't it? Because again, when we start to analyze our thoughts, I do the same. I don't ever have negative thoughts. And if I do, I know immediately they're not mine, and I go straight to the source of where they are, because I'm doing my protection every day, doing my meditation and clearing, and obviously I've been doing this for a long time. So as soon as I start to have a negative thought about somebody or something, I think, oh, that's not mine. That's going to be something outside of my field, because I know that I'm sovereign, because I've done my sovereignty check. I know that I'm fine. So I know that I'm picking up telepathic thoughts coming in from these entities, basically. And then I normally just, kind of thought to Chen, clear the interference, and then they're gone again. And I think everyone is, as you said, everyone is having these negative thoughts because these parasitic entities are around us all continually. And of course, they're causing, such trauma for people. And of course, they push the addictions. They encourage people to be addicted to things, and they're the thought in your mind to have another drink or to do drugs or substance or and of course that aligns with prisons, really. So you look at, Terry believed firmly that most people in prisons, and he actually interviewed quite a lot of people, lots of them would say to him, I've got no recollection of what I did. I might have killed somebody. I don't remember killing them. I don't think I did it.
I can verify that.
Yeah, they were possessed, basically. So another entity possesses them, carries out the criminal act, kills somebody or whatever, and then their spiritual energy comes back into the body. So they've got no conscious recollection of doing that at all. Yes. But of course, they're the ones that get found guilty and put into prison, but they didn't actually spiritually carry out. Their body may have carried out the event, but their conscious spiritual awareness didn't.
You try to convince a judge of that. One of the things that's so tricky about these things is they sound just like all the other thousands of thoughts you have during a day, and we're all assume that every thought that we have coming into our head belongs to us. That's just the assumption. It isn't true. It's far from true.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. I think when we understand that, we can start to, again, if we can start to educate people, train people, teach people how to get control of their energy, how to bring them back to spiritual sovereignty, how to control their field, that impacts their family, their friends, their work colleagues. If you're stood next to somebody with a very high vibration, they're going to bring your vibration up just by being stood there. And Chen used to say to me, because when we started to do this like 20 years ago, he said, we're gonna work to change the planet. And of course, I just laughed and thought, how are we going to do that? There's millions and millions of people here. He said, we do it one by one. So we clear one person. He said, then every time they walk somewhere, people that walk in their footprints receive a higher vibration because we leave our frequency of vibration where we stand. So everywhere you walk, if you've got a high frequency, people walk in your footsteps and it brings their frequency up a little bit. So as we kind of change one, it's almost like the starfish story of the guy on the beach that's throwing the starfish back, and there's millions of them. And someone says, what do you think you're doing? How can you help them all? And the guy goes, well, I can't help them all. And he throws another one back and says, but I helped that one. And I think that's kind of where we are, really, is that we need to have these conversations and get this awareness out to the general public, and certainly people that are going through severe traumas and things, because they are the ones being targeted by these negative entities effectively. And we can deal with them and we can clear them.
Absolutely. I agree. Anything is healable and clearable and transformable. Wow. I've really enjoyed this conversation, gentlemen. Super interesting. And Andy, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. Very, very interesting what you do. And Jerry, as always, you as well, for bringing Andy onto the show this evening, or this morning, this afternoon, wherever you guys are. And it's really amazing to know that people are doing this sort of stuff. I work with energies. I live in my other, call it dimensions, most of the day. So for me, everything is created from energy. If your energy is in alignment and you're flowing and you are doing the stuff that you need to be doing systematically, bit by bit, day by day, bite-sized chunks, being cool with yourself, not beating yourself up, being patient, being kind with yourself first and foremost. Then we move forward, and we move forward in unity. And so we do then flip flip the dark nest. Anyway, back into the honeycomb. Yay! Andy, is there anything you would like to maybe share? And I know we've put your links and everything in the description area, but is there anything you'd still like to share for us? And maybe just say something in closing.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys for having me on, really. I really appreciate the time. I know there's so many people out there talking about different things spiritually, and sometimes trying to get a window is quite difficult. So I'd like to thank you guys sort of from the bottom of my heart, really, and certainly Jerry for kind of opening the initial conversation, because again, the things that we're talking about are so extreme. Lots of people think it's a kind of, kind of an untrue conversation, whereas because we've all been doing this for so long, it's more a case of trying to find, an avenue to get the word out to help people, really, which is what we're all about. And I'm quite excited to kind of connect with Jerry. Obviously, we're starting to work together and share clients and look at the feedback and do some research. So for me, that's kind of a really positive way forward. Because I think one of the things from my perspective is we can perform psychic surgery on someone very quickly. But as you said, Chantelle and Jerry, it's the aftercare bit that's missing. It's hard to deal with these people because they don't do the right things generally. And then, of course, sometimes they don't get a particularly positive, or they may get like a slight intervention for a week or two, but then they go back to doing the things they were doing before. And of course, they go back to a low frequency and pick things up again. So I think the aftercare conversation is the bit that we need to find kind of resolution to. And I'm hoping that working with Jerry and the MACE method, that might be really good from our perspective, really. So just thanks to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Jerry, anything in closing from you?
Well, the only thing I can think of is, if you want to know how we came to the conclusion that these entities are real, is this book Sherry and I wrote. Now, Sherry heard these voices when she was young, and both of us got to talking one day, and we go, well, we need to let people know about what these things are and how we came to discover them. So we wrote this an amazing journey through the psychotic mind that talks about how we came to the conclusion that these things were entities, and how psychiatry is clueless about the real cause of schizophrenia.
Absolutely. Well, we've mentioned before on the show, and Andy, it might be of interest to you as well, just while we're on the topic. A lot of in the arcane, in the satanic world, they would generally target hospitals, prisons, and psych wards. And they literally would, using crystals mainly as a soul gem, when these people are so traumatized and chakras wide open, they literally harness that person's soul. They capture it in a crystal. And what happens then is that then keeps that body wide open for all these other entities to use it as a host body. So that's a lot of how the satanic world does what they do. And that's why it's so difficult for a lot of these guys, especially these hardened criminals who've become serial killers or whatever it is. It's very hard for them to turn back because they have no idea who they actually are from the beginning. Usually the trauma there has begun almost as an infant or even in the womb a lot of the time. So there is nothing that they know about who they are. There's like however many entities that are hosting there, but their own soul. But they've got to keep the guys alive, because that's how they keep using. They have to be alive to keep charging the magic, and they use that. The mages in the system use that to power their own magic. It's crazy. It's one big parasitic, vampire-ish world we're living in right now. But
it kind of reminds me of The Matrix. Obviously, when we watch The Matrix, I see The Matrix as a documentary now, really, as opposed to a film, because that's my view of what's going on here, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Tom Althouse was a guest on this channel for many, many years. He's actually the original and the true scriptwriter of The Matrix. But of course, it was always by the system taken over by the system and passed off as their own. And, a lot of their work has been stolen from them. A lot of the artists, their work and the creators. These guys have stolen their work from them. Matrix, Tom Althouse is one of them. So, yay. Thank you, gentlemen. Always good to be talking, having these amazing conversations. And thank you to everybody in the chat for joining us. I really appreciate you guys. Happy Saturday. Happy 2026. May goodness be with all of us this year. Take it by the horns and let's go. Thank you, everybody. Take good care, and I shall see you tomorrow. We got tomorrow book club for Patreons and members with Jesse. So anyone still want to join the Patreon, send us a book club. You're welcome to send us an email if you're a member or a Patreon, so that we can send you the link. Take good care. God bless you all. And we'll see you very, very soon.